Welcome to A Few Words with Eric Santamaria. I am he, Eric Santamaria. Who is Eric Santamaria? Well, I'm kind of going on the idea that some of you are backtracking a bit and have discovered this show later on and maybe downloaded some old shows to find out who I am, because who the hell am I? Some of you know me from the Wrestling Roundtable internet talk show series. I did that for about 5 years. We had over 2 million hits to this day, so it did pretty well. And I'm sitting here today with my best friend, someone who helped me along the line. His name is Lawrence Haber. Hi, Lawrence.
Allegedly.
Allegedly?
Hi, Eric. Can I say something before you go on your... Very briefly. Superfluous language. Right away I go, I am so happy that Eric is doing this, not just for Eric, but for all the people that will listen to it, because it's a long time coming and it's a suitable follow-up to the Roundtable. It's very exciting, and I'm very happy to be here in my house, but in the internet.
Well,
on the internet.
As a follow-up for the Roundtable, for a while now, people have been saying to me, you should have a podcast. And it's not just you or some other friends. This is my MMA instructor and other people in my life who said, you should have a podcast. And I've been wanting to do it for a little while, and it's taken a little bit. And that's because with the Roundtable, I was also working at Ring of Honor Wrestling. Some of you may have known and hated me from my commentary and hosting and things of that nature that I did. But it is a feather in my cap, because when we were in high school, we were doing wrestling videos in my basement and making our own storylines and characters. And one of the people that I was doing an impression of was Kevin Kelly. And then all of a sudden, years later, I'm co-hosting a pre-show standing next to Kevin Kelly in the Hammerstein Ballroom in front of 1,200 people. So it was really a trip. And I got to work with lots of people in Ring of Honor. Obviously, the big one is Daniel Bryan, as he would become known, but the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson back then. Some of the bigger names like Bruno Sammartino and Mick Foley passed through. Other people like CM Punk and Samoa Joe, Austin Aries. Those were essentially my coworkers, and I worked hands-on with them on a lot of different things. So maybe you know me from that, but I also figure at this point, we're going to talk about podcasts later on, but there's so much content out there. Everyone seems to have a podcast at this point, so why not me?
I'm doing one myself right now with you.
And as far as wrestling goes, the person that really kickstarted that, much like Mick Foley did with the wrestling book phase, he was the first one, and Colt Cabana was really the first one to do a wrestling podcast, and now there's tons. And obviously I worked with Cabana and Danielson on the Wrestling Road Diaries documentary that was really, really well received. Worked hands-on with Delirious. We were basically co-promoters for the Pro Wrestling Respect sister promotion for Ring of Honor. We did 6 total shows, but I really think of 5. The ones in Burlington, and you were involved with that too.
The music was tremendous. Very well done, professionally done.
But it was a big collaborative project, so we've had our fingerprints in some form in the wrestling world. But back to Cabana's podcast, what I really noticed is he uploads the shows to iTunes and SoundCloud and this and that. And other people like Jim Ross or whomever list theirs in the genre of sports. But Colt Cabana's is listed as personal journal. And I thought that was really fitting and cool for what this show is going to be. Because this one is called Not Quite The Roundtable, because I wanted to let our audience know who's left over from the Wrestling Roundtable. Because at some point, almost weekly, we would get messages, even as far away as Croatia or the UK, about, I miss the Wrestling Roundtable. I really wish it would come back. I miss you guys. Even a couple times a year, we're dying to hear your thoughts on, I don't know, WrestleMania or Ultimate Warrior dying, things like that. So I wanted to let all of those people know there is going to be a ton of pro wrestling talk, a ton of mixed martial arts talk. It's going to be all the stuff that you loved about Wrestling Roundtable, but we're going to expand it. I don't want to be confined to just one genre or theme. I even did a poll on the website a few years ago. If we did a roundtable on something that wasn't wrestling, whether it was movies or music or other sort of media, anything, would you want us to do that? And the overwhelming majority was yes. Even people would write us sometimes about, you should do a roundtable on Batman movies or something like that. And that's exactly what A Few Words with Eric Santamaria is going to be. We're going to talk about whatever I feel like talking about, basically, whether it's pop culture, media, movies, music, books, TV, anything like that. We can talk about health and nutrition, politics, anything that comes to mind. So I hope that you join us on this journey and enjoy it as it goes along.
I'm very excited. I just got very excited from that whole soliloquy, and it's mostly for being in my car and having a really cool additional source of audio to listen to.
Well, I listen to stuff in my car all the time, and we are in the podcast genre finally, and you and I talk about that all the time. We're podcast fanatics.
Yeah, I guess we are.
The reason it's taken a little while to get back into the swing of things is also because of how basically my life has gone the last few years. It's been a really rough few years, and a lot of that had to do with the end of the Wrestling Roundtable, which we will talk about later on. But in the interim, I don't want to trivialize anything by including my cats in there. But if we wanted to backtrack a little bit, it could actually start with my cats. It was a sequence of bad things. Because
we're officially a podcast because we're talking about your cats.
My cats. But it's true. I'm an animal person. I love animals, and I had cats most of my life. But in a row, we had to put down a lot of my cats. My oldest cat, Lily, she was 19 years old. So I had her most of my life, and that was really heartbreaking. I'll never forget how much my mom cried when we were putting down some of those cats. And that was very hurtful in a sense. And that happened in I think the last one was about 2008. And then I started volunteering at a cat shelter to get my cat fix. And then later that year, my grandmother died. And I was pretty close with my grandmother. This is my grandma on my mom's side. And she lived to a good age. She was about 89, 90 or so when she died. But she had been declining for a couple years mentally. It was a little dementia, really. And that was hard to do because I had lost my grandfather in 99. He had died of a blood cancer type thing, but I wasn't as close with him. And then my grandmother died. It was about November of 2009. And then...
Wait, I want to say something. I want to say before you continue, because this is important for people listening, that Eric is one of the strongest people I know. Okay, and if it doesn't come out for what he just said, the next few things he's going to say, I just want to say that I admire his strength and his character for how he has dealt with it. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but it's important that I say that for people.
I appreciate that. In a sense, I feel a little bit of obligation to my family. They're the people I love the most in my life. It's just something I felt I had to do going forward, helping them and taking care of them. But it was just about a year, almost to the date, in November 2010 that my mother died. She had a very rare and fast-moving stomach cancer at the end of her stomach where it connects to the intestine. It's duodenal and adenocarcinoma. And that was very hard to deal with. Even though relatively fast-moving cancer, it was still just under 6 months from diagnosis to death. Having the person you care about most in the world die in front of your face isn't something you're going to recover from, really. All this time heals all wounds stuff, I don't really see that happening for myself. I'm a very hypersensitive, emotional person as it was. So I know how my mind works, and I still dream about them and cry about it to this day. But it was just a real trip that I just saw my uncles and my aunts and my cousins and my family a year before for my grandmother's death. And now we are here again just about exactly a year later for my mom. And my mom would also take care of my grandma too. She spent most of her life as a homemaker and cleaning secretaries' offices and things like that. And she didn't really get to go around very much. So my mom would be there every weekend, call her all the time, try to bring her out and take her to different things. And we were trying to do that for my mom towards the end of her life, because even if she had made it, it would have been a terrible situation where she would have had a stint and we would have needed to put a chair to go up the stairs and this and that. And would have been for the rest of her life, but she didn't make it. And I remember you being there for my family, Lawrence, and some of my family needed that, especially my dad. My dad, he was from Uruguay. He was an immigrant. He came to this country in 1968. And his father had a similar experience in a way. His mom died when he was about 15 or 16 of stomach cancer. So for him to have to live through this again, decades later, with someone he was married to for 30 whatever years, and you'd think you're going to be with someone the rest of your life into your golden years, as it's called, I suppose. I never saw him cry like that. I never saw him so hurt. So for you to be there for my family afterwards, I remember after the wake, it was you, me, my sister, her friend Jamie, and my dad at the dinner table. He was drinking wine and telling stories about my mom and growing up in the old country and this and that. And just the fact that you were there, I'll never forget that. And as things went on, it got a little rough. I'll detail some of the roundtable stuff a little later on, but
I just want to say you're both of your parents, but a brief anecdote. So when Eric and I were in high school, we had our own, let's call it basement wrestling, not backyard, because it was literally in Eric's basement. And we were pioneers, I guess. We took advantage of mom and dad and their hospitality. Eric's parents would allow everyone over. They'd get everyone pizza. They would just treat us so well, and Eric would have us over for pay-per-views and for whatever. There was an incident where, at my suggestion, an aluminum air conditioning cover,
oh my God,
was in the corner of the, let's call it the ring area, or our outside area. And I thought this would make a nice big sound. It's aluminum. It's like a quote unquote steel chair. This is a perfect thing to launch at my head. And little did I know there was a nice jagged metal edge. And Eric, at no fault of his own, allegedly.
You called the spot. No, I was on my back and you said, throw it at me. So I did.
Yeah, so I did. And the corner hit me in the head. And I got color. I started to bleed hard way, and we stopped the match. Actually, no, I think we did.
No, we
had to reshoot the finish.
Come on, we're not
Vince McMahon. It was
like
a SmackDown taping. We actually had to reshoot the finish
later on.
And Eric's parents were so gracious, and my parents were so impressed by just how caring they were, and they felt so guilty, but it was not their fault at all that their son's best friend was such an idiot. And I also want to talk about very briefly how in college my Thursday night ritual was to call Eric up at like 11 at night and say, "What are you doing?" And
this was when we weren't on AOL until 4 a.m.
Yeah, and I would go to Eric's house and we'd walk around the cul-de-sac for hours on end, and we'd go into Eric's house at 2 a.m. to drink tea. And Eric's mom would just come downstairs as if this was totally normal. She'd work the next day and be like, "Oh, hey, Lawrence, how you doing? How's your family?" Like making conversation. My parents would be like, "You're too loud." You know, they'd be just freaking out. And his mom in particular was so gracious. And his dad would sometimes sit down and watch a moment of a pay-per-view with us and make fun of it and leave, which was very entertaining.
They weren't wrestling fans like we were, but they would entertain some stuff. Like
they were Eric's friends fans. They loved having people over that were, I guess, people they liked. And yeah, I miss them.
Yeah, me too.
They were good people.
Because in the interim, after my mom died, it was a couple years later that I got laid off from Ring of Honor. They had been bought by Sinclair Broadcasting, and I think us in Bristol, Pennsylvania, in that office knew that our days were numbered, and eventually my day came where they kicked me to the curb a few days before Christmas. From there, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life because I had wanted to be a pro wrestler. That's how I ended up at Ring of Honor, because I wanted to be a wrestler. I trained with CM Punk for a little bit. I got hurt, and then I really let low self-esteem and me not believing in myself get in the way of my dream. And it's something that still bothers me to this day, in a sense. Maybe if I had found a teacher who was more interested in his students, like Danielson or Delirious later on, things would have worked out a little different. But as it was, I sat in the office for a little over 8 years, and I was on the road too, shooting the shows, and it just killed me because I would see everybody else being more involved with the show or doing things that I wanted to be doing, and I just wasn't really afforded. I would get some bones thrown at me here and there, like do the commentary for this DVD or do the ring announcing for this show, but it was always a circumstance where it was Bobby Cruz, we're not going to fly him out, or Dave Prazak's flight got canceled, so you're in. It wasn't you're good, so we want you. They were just in a bind. And every time I would do stuff like that, everyone would say, good job afterwards. You did a good job. And then the next time would come around and it's back to somebody else. And I really didn't know what to make of it. Either people were blowing smoke up my ass or they're just lying to me, or I don't know. I don't know if maybe I just was no good. But everyone was saying, oh, you are talented and good and this and that. I mean, I could detail some of the Ring of Honor stuff in a later show, but just to give you an idea. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I guess wasted might be the word, but I spent most of my 20s doing that stuff that I didn't really want to be doing. I'm a good editor, I thought. I think I got typecast in that role. That's what I was told by certain people. That's your contribution to the company. And I guess no more potential was seen in me beyond that. So I tried getting into acting, and how do you do that, right? It's no one really knows. And again, listening to so many podcasts, there really isn't a quote path per se. There's certain things you should be doing, but everyone has a different way of breaking in. So I was doing that. I wasn't really diehard about looking for another job just yet. But in the interim, after doing some gigs, then suddenly my dad died. And at this point, it was just me and him. My sister had taken a job in another state, so it was just me and him. That was basically a heart attack with diabetes-related problems. So he lasted about 24 hours after I called the ambulance. And again, Lawrence, you were there for me. People know Rodney LeConte and Alex Payne from the Wrestling Roundtable days. They came right to the hospital. You guys are my brothers. I didn't want anybody else in the elevator with me that day, and that's why I turned around and told it to you. It really meant a lot for you guys to drop everything and come to my aid if I needed it or my parents needed it. Then it's like, well, what do I do now? I had to now sell this house that we've been in for 30 whatever years, and excavating that basically ate up the rest of my 2014. And then I bounced around for a little bit, and I ended up at Tiger Schulman's Mixed Martial Arts. I started training there 5 days before I got laid off from Ring of Honor. So the perfect time to not have health insurance. Thanks. And I just loved training there. The kickboxing, stand-up, the grappling, especially, I just loved it. I ended up getting an opportunity to be a temporary manager, and that was cool because I got to go up to headquarters, train with the fight team, Sensei Nick Pace, who's a former UFC fighter, a couple of the I took his class, but some of the fighters are now in UFC, and I wasn't rolling with them per se, but they were right next to me. I progressed up the ladder a little bit. It was a lot of work. It was like 50 hours a week. And eventually the school shut down. So now I'm SOL again. And those are some of the things that I've been through in the last few years. So I hope you can sympathize a little bit if I dropped off the radar. And what really hurt was, for a while, I've always been a creative person. I won art awards when I was a kid for painting, drawing. I write. Obviously, some of my writing was in Gary Capetta's Body Slams book. I did some quotes for that in the later edition.
The spear.
The spear, my God. If Mike Joyce is out there listening, we still remember writing for you. So I wrote for the Wild House of Wrestling newsletter, which I think I was there for, something like 7 years. And that was run by who you would know now as Byron Saxton. So wrote for him for a while. And I've been featured on some blogs and things like that. And a lot of the commercials for Ring of Honor, I wrote the copy for that. A lot of our demos, obviously Pro Wrestling Respect, I wrote all those too. Now trying to get in some acting and voice work, things like that. So I've always been creative. And that's where the roundtable comes in. And before we dive into the roundtable, I'm just explaining this because all this emotional trauma and all of these terrible things I've been through the last few years, I've had a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, self-esteem issues, anger issues, a lot of things like that. And it's really taken a toll on my creative output. I'm still running the Roundtable Facebook and Twitter, but obviously that's not the same thing as doing a video show, internet radio show, the website, newsletter, whatever. And I started worrying for a while if maybe the creative spark was gone. Maybe I don't have it anymore. And after a couple years, the gears started turning a little bit. And I actually got into podcasts because I needed something to listen to while I was taking care of selling the house and getting rid of stuff in the house. And I'll detail that a little later. But that's what led us to here now with the podcast. I'm starting to make some more stuff. So I hope you enjoy the input, but want to talk a little bit more about the Wrestling Roundtable because that had a huge influence on our lives, I think. And how did the Roundtable start, Lawrence? We've talked about it a couple times. Rodney did a great documentary, Behind the Lens, that's on YouTube.
Yeah, Rod, you made a great 2 parts. Is there more?
I don't think we'll ever see part 2, but tell the audience how it came to be that we took this idea of us doing a talk show about pro wrestling on the internet.
Well, as creatures of habit and ritual, we had our Thursday night tradition of walking around the block and hanging out at Eric's house. But the Monday night tradition for a number of years in the mid-2000s was to go to Rod's house and our mutual friend Brian Coppola, not Coppola, also a filmmaker, his house and watch Raw. And we began speaking about the build-up for WrestleMania 23 and the big main event, the only main event on that show, which was a certain presidential candidate and Vince McMahon in a hair versus hair match.
It's Donald Trump, okay? It's Donald Trump.
And there was a debate at the end of the show about the poster, the build up to the show, but also the poster,
right? Specifically,
which had an image of the 2 stars of the match, the 2 celebrities, Vince and Donald, and had the wrestlers Umaga and Bobby Lashley in the background, not the foreground. It looked as if the match was between the 2 guys in the suits,
right?
And I had thought that this made total sense because this is what the promotion, this is what people want to see, this is what's going to get on television, and Eric had pointed out, which is an honest assessment, that it appeared like the match was the actual physical confrontation match was going to be between the 2 guys in the suits. And we went back and forth for a while, and I think Ronnie just enjoyed us arguing with each other and egging
right.
us both on, now that I think back about it, which isn't the first time that's happened.
That's usually his role.
Yeah, which progressively gets Eric angrier and then makes me realize how fun it is, and we kind of go in that direction.
My friends love egging me on.
Just
annoying me is one of their biggest joys in life.
Speaking of which, they never sewed up that Mr. America thing. I really want to know who it is.
And that's exactly what Lawrence is doing right now. But let me just say about the poster specifically, because I've never given my side.
Oh, here we go.
But my point is that, yes, it is creating the idea, the impression that Vince is actually going to have a match with Donald Trump, which I understand your point on. That's what's going to draw eyes to the promotion and sell the match. I mean, it did do the biggest buy rate in WWE history to this day, didn't it? So I guess mission accomplished. But my point was that Umaga was the Intercontinental Champion. And
Umaga.
And Bobby Lashley was Umaga was the Intercontinental Champion, and Lashley was the ECW champ. And forget even the belts per se, because they could do for the Raw audience every week
they're called championships. There are no belts.
Whatever. That they could have put a montage together about the history of each title, make it seem important. This is for the wrestling fans, not the mainstream fans who are going to buy it anyway. But Also, this could be the chance to make Lashley and Umaga a bigger star.
Right.
And I actually originally wasn't the rumor that Shane McMahon was trying to book Bob Sapp versus Chuck Liddell.
That was a rumor.
Yeah, something ridiculous. But they didn't get the freak shows. So you have Umaga and Lashley. This could be a big chance to make them stars. Yeah. And I thought the whole thing was completely lost. I think you could still...
Well, it ended with, I believe, stunners to everyone. But Lashley, who recently I watched that, and Lashley stood there and helped... Trump up, and like that was it. And Austin just kind of walked away drinking beer, giving everyone the bird. And I remember thinking, and now in hindsight, obviously in 2020, you were 100% right. I have to concede it here on the show. Well,
why?
Maybe not
because
so much.
I think your point stands about drawing the eyes.
Get the eyes, bring people in with the people in the suits cutting their hair. Especially Vince selling the haircut, like, wow, as if it was painful to get a haircut.
Hey, it could hurt, I guess.
I guess it could. Depends on your barber. And boy, they should have got Beefcake for that, shouldn't they? If you think about it, the chair got an entrance.
I actually
the actual barber chair did get an entrance.
I thought that going as far back as Edge and Kurt Angle, Molly and Victoria, all those. Brutus Beefcake should have gotten a payday every time.
He's got a payday every time.
The cake.
The cake, and I met the cake with the fanny pack at the Club Benet in New Jersey about 20 years ago. He's a very nice man, the cake. So anyway, in hindsight, the focus of the segment itself and the aftermath should have been on the two guys in the match, because they were both stars that they were grooming. And all these years later, we know, I mean, obviously Umaga's passed, unfortunately, and Lashley is in a place where well,
where is he?
We know where he is.
Bellator,
well, I don't know.
TNA, whatever.
He's somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, clearly they weren't and still aren't in the make new stars business.
Not when it comes to having celebrity involvement, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations about that as time goes on. But so to get back to the genesis of the roundtable, this was probably like the first or second year that YouTube was a thing that people were using,
right?
And as everybody does now and has been doing since that time, 10, 11 years ago, it was a place to go to get free, immediate video content of pretty much everything in the entire recorded history of humanity is on YouTube in some form or other. It's our time capsule in society. And
it made, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but you know how I had this extensive video collection of wrestling?
Yes.
That made it so completely obsolete immediately. Everything's digital
it's
now in Flash on YouTube.
You had your WWE Network in your room.
Yeah, at least the music wasn't changed on that one.
But we realized how lively the debate was and how good it was, and I think there was a point in the conversation where we all realized, like, this is great. We should put it on YouTube. And honestly, I as Eric loves, I will like to take credit for pretty much everything and say, yeah, it was my idea. I don't actually remember who actually said, let's film this and put it on YouTube.
I probably did.
It was probably me.
No, I say that because keep in mind that I was on YouTube a lot back then.
Yeah.
All the Ring of Honor content on YouTube I was doing. Every video wire, good or bad, I did. So I would also do the copyright infringement, which everyone hates. But I would go around YouTube and see all these people doing basically webcam shows and getting tons of views for basically nonsense.
And I do want to say, like, we could put others down to lift ourselves up. And those people who did that and still do that, you know what? They're doing no differently from what we did. Now, I don't want to spend time talking about, this guy or that guy and how they were terrible, whatever. The point is that we saw that they could do this, that YouTube had this opportunity,
and we could do it better.
And we could do it, but we wanted, because we're kind of all producers to different degrees in different ways. We said, well, we could do this. We could do it our way. We could do it a little bit better production, and people probably say, well, yeah, it wasn't that great, but at least try and make it more of a talk show. And we were inspired by. Certainly Eric was inspired by some of his favorite talk shows and political talk shows, and how we could maybe have like an amalgam of how a talk show that we like that had nothing to do with wrestling or MMA operated, have a really tightly produced show that was always a certain length of time, like the best podcasts are. So it wasn't like too much content, and it wasn't too little content, and it would be much like a podcast, coincidentally enough, conversational, but still directed. So Eric would kind of be the host and lead it. And it over time, as we did the first 2 or 3, we realized what the shape of it would be, like what it was actually going to, what the actual content would be, and how it would be produced with Eric as a host and different panelists. And it just really kind of just happened. I mean, I mean, you put a ton of work, and I can't say enough how much work Eric put into this thing. But it's like when you watch the end of a movie and it's an indie movie or something, and it's like produced, written by, directed by, music by, it's all like one person. And really, you can't, if you like the Roundtable to any degree, 99.999% of the credit goes to Eric for everything from the editing to getting the audio levels. We all contributed some, but I think at the end of the day, we all wanted to kind of be talent and be people who got to talk about their opinions and things like that. But Eric really made it into a show. Otherwise, it would have been like any other YouTube thing, people just sitting around talking, and you kind of fast forward to find the interesting parts. He made it into a show, an actual thing that you could put on your television and sit there for a half an hour and feel like you were watching something that was professionally done.
Thanks for putting me over, brother.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about other influences, it was the time was right for it, because the Legends of Wrestling show was on 24/7.
Right.
That was critically well received, but I had a problem with it because the concept was great, but when someone like Michael Hayes would start spouting off stuff that was factually wrong, I'm not talking about an opinion, I mean factually stuff, when he'd be like, WCW signed Bret Hart. He didn't debut for 6 months. So what the hell? That's completely not what happened whatsoever. And no one would call them on that. Or Nash talking about, well, the NWO finger poke thing would have worked if Goldberg wouldn't put his arm through the windshield when that was 9 or 12 months later or whatever. Stuff like that. Someone needed to keep them in check. So I thought it was a good idea, and I thought that's what we could do for the collective consciousness, because we did one episode later on that was about the internet wrestling community, and everyone loves to spout this idea, including Rodney, of the internet ruined wrestling. And I said, no, it didn't. What ruins wrestling, like most things, is misinformation, not spoilers and things like that. And I would talk about things like, you see comments, again, on YouTube or message boards or whatever, with things like, ha, 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 stupid WCW, they never revealed the Hummer driver, when, no, check your facts. They did. April 10th.
I was thinking about that like last night. I came home and I was, for some reason, I was like, what was the yes, the outcome was that the Russo Bischoff Nitro, right?
Yes.
That he hit Hogan or Kidman or something, and Bischoff got out, and maybe Shivani was like,
it was Bischoff! Yeah.
And I was like, bravo, they tied up a loose end, even though it's pretty much worthless at this point. At least they did it.
No, but they did,
know?
Because now everyone has this impression, wrongly, that WCW let that go.
Yeah.
Like it was GTV or something. And I think on the new Attitude Era DVD, they reveal it's Goldust.
Okay.
Oh, finally.
Oh, great, 20 years later.
Yeah, right. But it was similar things like that, mostly WCW related, of course. But I wanted to do our version of that. And like you said, I'm very influenced by Real Time with Bill Maher, The Howard Stern Show, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to take our personality.
Muppet Babies.
Yeah, very much. And I wanted to take our personalities and fuse that together. And also my agenda too was I wanted to show Ring of Honor, as I would try to get more commentary spots or hosting or whatever, that I could get people to listen to me
and watch.
Yeah. And I knew from my scouting around YouTube for the company that I kind of knew my way around, at least before Google took it over. And now I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But I thought we could build an audience, because I'm not going to put this much work into it if 12 people are going to watch it. Yeah. And eventually we did. We would do a double shot. Let's say it was Dayton and Chicago, like we usually would do for Ring of Honor. And then I would upload the latest Roundtable segment maybe the day before. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the weekend, more people had viewed me on YouTube than had attended both Ring of Honor shows combined. So I thought this might get me some inroads. And it's funny enough, I didn't tell Ring of Honor that I was going to do it before I did it, because you know that saying, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I kept thinking, well, I want to tell the truth. The truth is, we see it at least, and give a reality check to a industry that's full of lies. And I thought, well, if I go to them and say, I'm going to do a talk show on YouTube about wrestling, and we're not going to do it with kid gloves on, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, everything in between, steroids, even if that comes up, things like that. And I figured they're not going to want me to do that. As it turns out, eventually everybody seemed to be a Roundtable fan at Ring of Honor. At least they coexisted. I know Carrie Silken, who owned it, was a fan. He'd say, when am I going to be on the show? And Sid in the office was a big help when we were trying to get the name out, putting flyers down, or if we were shooting a blog. It was very helpful. So I know people liked it. So there were a lot of different factors that went into the creation of the Roundtable. And I noticed that a lot of people who were fans of the show would say, I liked it because it reminded me of my friends and I talking about wrestling. And that's exactly what it was. Now, to this day, because everything's still there on Blog Talk Radio and YouTube, even iTunes and whatever, there are hundreds of hours of me and my friends talking about wrestling on the internet.
I think people, the podcast revolution, I guess you call it a revolution, and even like the talk radio, people don't like to be by themselves, and they like to sometimes they don't want to be participating. They want to just kind of listen in and hear others who have similar opinions. And it's amazing with podcasts and YouTube that even famous people or politicians or musicians or filmmakers, wrestlers, whatever it might be, when you hear people just talking honestly and candidly, it's very comforting. And for me, I know when I'm driving, I just love even things I'm not that interested in. I'll become engaged and interested when I hear people talk about things they're passionate about,
Right.
and the person's listening to them. You can't help as a person find that to be inspiring in some way. If not, I don't know what to tell you. But for me, at least, and for I think a lot of people, that explains content in the internet being such a YouTube and all that stuff, the social media, why it's so popular and so widely used is people like to stay connected at a safe distance, I guess, or something. Where and that's I think part of the revolution and the excitement of it, when people have a story to tell. They have a story to tell, like you do. People are interested in that because everybody has a story. I heard a great quote from somebody that everyone has and forgive me for not citing it, but it's a great quote, and it's everybody has a great, and I'm going to butcher it, a great novel, a great film, and a great song in them, and it's just up to you to make it happen. Otherwise, somebody else is going to do it, and they might put a bunch of stuff in it that you may not want. So you got to do it for yourself. And there's so many people doing that now. People who are notable, comedians, musicians, and then people who are not. I mean, there's so many people on the internet that are just people in their houses, and they're doing really cool stuff. They're making movies and fan films and music. It's astounding. And I think the Roundtable, historically, for its little niche of wrestling and MMA, was one of the pioneers. Not to like over exaggerate it, but we really were part of that revolution of you can do this yourself. You can do it on your iPhone. You can do it from your basement. You can go to the store and buy a couple of microphones and a decent camera and make something really cool happen and relevant, and people will find it. And the cream rises to the top. When something is quality, you may not have a huge audience, but you might find your little niche of people that will appreciate it, and then they may be inspired to do it themselves.
And when it came to people who appreciated it, obviously we enjoyed doing it at the time, but so did the fans. And I was very happy with the audience that we started building. I started getting recognized at Ring of Honor shows from people from Ireland, from Canada, from wherever. And I even remember, especially after we did the one with Cabana to promote the Road Diaries, we were doing a show it was Detroit or Dearborn, somewhere in Michigan. And 8 people completely independent of themselves came up and said, hey, you're the host of Wrestling Roundtable, I'm a big fan, or oh, you're Eric Santamaria, blah blah blah. And that was really gratifying because I mean it is validation in a way, but to know outside of the YouTube comments that it's a physical real person in front of you taking the time out to introduce themselves and say that they enjoy your work, that was very gratifying.
Yeah, there is a bit of a strange thing that happens with this stuff where people feel very connected to those they don't know because they listen to their show or they watch the show on YouTube or a podcast or what have you, and then you never really meet them or get to know them. And so, what I think in our society, it's a weird kind of, I guess, epidemic where everyone's connected, but they're not connected at all at the same time. And so, hopefully, through this podcast and through the other projects that we're all doing, we can actually connect with people. I mean, there's going to be most people we're never going to meet, but it is so amazing when you get a message or you find someone in person and you get to see them in person and breathe the same air for a moment. That is the best thing. That because people, they need to be more connected. We're so connected literally through our phones and stuff, but we're not connected as humans, organisms living on the same planet at all anymore, like in the actual physical sense of being near each other and at the same place. And
looking
that's like
in each other's eyes.
Yeah, like that's why it's amazing when you see a concert or you go to like an NXT show or anytime we talk about wrestling, we do the funny voice, don't we? An NXT show.
And it always goes back to wrestling.
We have to make it relatable for the fans who are listening for that purpose. So
no,
we
but we do that. Everything always goes back to wrestling. Like I said to you, something I wanted to do, some motif, and I said, it's kind of like when Kane would randomly show up on Raw in '97 to just destroy somebody. I want that sort of feeling.
Just watch the news. It's all a work. But that collective emotion that happens at a concert or at a show is amazing. You're connected with people you've never met, and you're in a movie theater. Movie's a great example. That you're in a movie and you're watching something with a bunch of people you've never met, and you're all kind of watching the same thing and feeling those moments. And I think that needs to happen more while still having the really cool internet connectivity that we all have instantly now. I think both of those things are important.
And did you have any favorite memories of doing the round table, favorite topics or episodes or jokes or points?
Watching you put up a sign while everybody watched you put up a sign. One time, Eric was just trying to put the sign up in the background, and all of us morons were standing there looking at him, and he kind of just looked at us. I don't think he said anything. You're like, why are you not helping with this? No, that's just me and Rodney being me and Rodney and egging Eric on. But
just also wasn't what I asked at all.
Yeah, that's correct. Specific memories. The first for few shows, just sitting there with you and Rodney and having an opportunity at that time to talk about current events and having it be so timely. And the actually the radio show, the Blog Talk Radio show, was really like this. It was like being in an actual radio show, and in that format, getting to kind of have Eric lead us like Howard Stern or something, like a real host, and have us each take our turn. How I just was so fascinated by. I know it's not a specific instance, but just in general, the Blog Talk Radio show, how you took this YouTube show and were able to create a version of it for another media form and how it just kind of magically, I don't know, or instantly, just organically, that's a word used, a very cliche word, but organically became a radio show, and we figured it out. And that's, I guess, overall, we just figured out how to do this stuff. We figured out, well, we need lights, we need a table, we need sound, we need a few cameras and a hard cam, and we just figured it out as we went along, and eventually we made it.
I have a least favorite episode. I'm pretty proud of most of them, but the one that I was not happy with at all was the funniest and least funniest, because I don't know where my mind was, but I completely neglected to mention two of the funniest things ever in wrestling.
I'm imagining we're about to hear what they are, yes?
Yes.
Do the drum roll on the table.
The paparazzi production skits with Nash and the Cruiserweights.
That also came up recently.
And the first JCW Juggalo VHS tape. That is one of the funniest parodies, I guess, of wrestling I've ever heard.
That must have been the birth of Iron Sheik as a comedic character.
Kinda, yeah. And I didn't mention those two at all, so I was always disappointed forever with that. But my favorite episode, the one that I felt was the most fully realized Wrestling Roundtable, was our episode on the 10th anniversary of Owen Hart's death with the best and worst, or whatever, technical wrestlers. Between the backdrop of the ring ropes, the topic through the Real News Network. I was able to use some clips from the Wrestling with Shadows documentary, which I really loved. Things like that. I thought overall that was what I envisioned Wrestling Roundtable to be. And obviously, we're our own biggest fans. I think all of us end up watching a lot of old episodes here and there.
We're like 60% of the views, I think. Is
But I forget a lot of the goofy stuff that I say, and I crack myself up and on some of our exchanges and jokes and stuff.
Because it's natural, Eric. It's natural. People just talking to each other as friends. You forget. Like even here, there's this weird thing going on where I'm doing a podcast, and am I really in the moment talking to you, or am I like kind of managing what's happening in my brain and listening to myself instead of being in the moment? And when you get those, it may not happen in every roundtable episode or every podcast, but there are those moments where you get lost in the conversation and it becomes natural, and you watch that back and it's like, oh my, that's real. That is an authentic, truthful moment of two people talking or three people talking. So hopefully we get there and I stop listening to what I'm saying.
It's a conversation. It's a long-form conversation. It's just two people talking.
Did we start yet, by the way?
Did we start? Oh, it's already recording. Yeah, we've been recording since we got in the room.
Podcast humor.
But one thing that I was asked constantly as the years went on for Wrestling Roundtable, I'll ask you now. Why'd you leave?
Why did I leave? I think at that point in my life, I had taken on a lot of other creative projects and music in particular, and it was just time. You know what? To be completely honest, it took time. It takes time to take, and this is a criticism of myself, not a criticism of you. It takes time to produce something to go to someone's house, I guess, and kind of give up a Sunday and record. And I loved it, and I think we did a lot of them. And I would be lying if I said I wanted to move over for other people, because we all have huge egos and nobody wants to do that at the end of the day. But it really was just time. I play a lot and work a lot, and I just needed my as much free time as I could, and that was one of the things that I sacrificed, to be truthful. And I don't regret it. It was the right thing to do for me at the time. I got to come back on the Invasion show, which was awesome.
Yeah, it rubbed me the wrong way.
Oh, that I didn't do it anymore?
Well, that one in particular, because it wasn't just you, but other people came out of the woodwork just for that one. So it made me feel like,
oh,
this is
the real show.
Yeah, I want to prioritize that one. The rest isn't worth my time, but I'll come back for this one.
I thought that we had a conversation about. You said, do you want to come back for it? And I was like, absolutely. And now am I misremembering that?
Perhaps, but it just at first I thought I had an open door policy. Like, you know what? It's your life.
Well, you changed that at the end. You wanted the guys that
real
wanted
bitter
to do it, even the last show. But, I don't begrudge that. You're totally right for being a little bit ticked off at me or others for choosing to not do it and then wanting to come back when we wanted to. But I will say, that's one of the things when you make something yourself, as I've learned, when you're the producer, you're the guy in charge, you're the leader, you've got to roll with that stuff, and the show must go on.
Well, as Chris Harris once said to me, if you don't plan it, it doesn't happen, to me in particular. And yeah, I know that if we had this idea, like, let's take this conversation and put it on the internet, I got to take the bull by the horns, because no one else is going to put in the time and the work that I would. So I understand that, but I also just felt it would be a little more collaborative, let's say, as opposed to people just taking a Sunday here and there to record for a few hours. I was hoping for a little bit more on their downtime.
I think everybody likes to hear themselves talk and be talent,
right,
if you will, and not want to kind of get the hands dirty. Me and my metaphors. I think I used this on the same metaphor on Rodney's documentary, getting their hands dirty, working
in the trenches, building a house.
Building a house. I just think people like to show up and do the thing that they like to do and leave. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. It's just one of those things you had to say, I have to accept and then figure out, am I comfortable with working that way? Do I want the guys to, do I want to sit them down and say, and you did a lot,
a lot,
or emails, long Eric emails, which were very well written, great punctuation and perfect grammar, but saying, hey guys, I know everybody's busy and would you, maybe everyone can help a little more, but it all comes down to as the leader planning. And if people aren't meeting the expectations, if you give them a job and say, if you don't do this, you can't be a panelist anymore. I need you to run the camera. I need you to bring the duct tape, to find me a suitable tablecloth, or
things like that weren't the issue per se. It was other outside.
But
yeah.
I think everybody always had the best intentions, and the best compliment you can give is that they loved the show so much that they wanted to do it and they wanted to be on it. So.
And one of the best compliments is, to this day, Will Brooks, who was a fan of the show and then joined the show, still wears the Roundtable shirt out to.
I got mine.
Yeah, still wears it to wrestling shows and things like that, and that's, I think, really sweet. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
As the years went on, there were a few things that really chipped away at my enthusiasm, let's say. I think 2010 was the year that I really burnt out. Just on the Roundtable alone, I was doing the video show, the internet radio show, and the website. And all three of those take a lot of time in and of themselves. That's also when I was at Ring of Honor. I was working full time in another state, long commute. Not that it bothers me per se, but that's what my schedule was like. And then I'd be on the road. I'd be gone whenever we'd do that for maybe half the week, flying to wherever. So I was still on the road, still working full time, and doing all this on top of it. I was living in Final Cut Pro because I'd be in the office there staring at a screen and then go home and spend the rest of the night. I was sleeping about 4 hours a night, and I functioned pretty well on that, but it was just a lot of work. And in addition, I was taking on the Road Diaries documentary. We were doing the Pro Wrestling Respect shows, so there was scheduling and editing and promoting around that. And by the end of the year, my mother had died. And when we get to 2011, our Google AdSense account had been suspended, I think, around this time. So I wasn't even making any money on it anymore. Right. So in addition to that, I'd selectively inserted some Roundtable stuff in the Road Diaries because I knew it was going to do well, I thought. And it was well received. Putting down flyers, WrestleMania weekend, and all this other stuff to try and grow the brand, so to speak. And it really wasn't doing that. It was almost kind of going in the opposite direction. So I'm like, I'm putting in all this effort. I'm not making money. I'm burning myself out. That really was killing my enthusiasm. And at the end, I also was trying to sell it or shop it around to different networks. I put packages together, sent it to Spike TV and other places like that. And that wasn't getting anywhere either because that's where I wanted to take it. I always thought we'd be perfect for the Sirius XM radio format. I know they have wrestling shows. I know we would do great on Spike, I thought, instead of Cops reruns or whatever they're filling up their content with. So I thought we were tailor-made for that sort of format, and I wanted to get it there, and it really wasn't. So all those things added together, it just really wasn't going the way that I wanted it to. So I felt like it's time to move on to the next phase. And we see how things went for me for a few years after that. But here we are now. And a few words. I hope we grow the audience from here. And like I had mentioned earlier, I got into podcasting right after my dad died because I don't know about you. I'm sure you have a similar experience being a very hearing-oriented person, but I've been playing around with audio since I was a kid. Cassette recordings of TV and radio and me making goofy noises and this and that, then progressing onto like sound recorder on the PC. And now, of course, in the real digital era where we're recording a podcast. In fact, I actually found this recording of you and I from January 2001. We were talking about Fushient buying WCW. It was the day before a press conference. Listen to this. Listen to this. I found this.
The shoot.
Oh, yeah, tomorrow WCW gets sold. There's definitely a press conference tomorrow. They don't know what they're announcing online because they don't want to say they're definitely getting sold because they never do that because then they'd be lying if it's not true. But everyone kind of knows right now.
According to Pennsylvania, it's Bischoff.
I don't know what I think about that. When I get all the information, I'll make a decision.
I don't know. Bischoff is so bad. Because I'm right around.
It depends, how it's done. When I heard that the company that bought it wants it to become like the WWF and be on the stock exchange, that's good because that means they guarantee they have to be successful.
Because I was watching stuff, and I'm right around the time right before Bischoff was fired the first time in Fall. And Nitro wasn't too bad because he's got Blitzkrieg and Eddie Guerrero and Mysterio tag teaming, and
just politics.
He was pushing Benoit with the U.S. title.
But that was so forced.
He still did it.
Yeah.
Wow, you just recorded that? Like, how did that happen?
We were having a conversation just like this, and I recorded it with a
So
stereo.
bizarre. I don't
cassette
even
or something.
remember that. I try to pride myself on remembering stuff I've done.
Well, we're almost done here for our first episode, but I wanted to talk a little bit about podcasts because, like I said, I got into it because all my life I've been trying to listen to something, whether it was playing around with audio.
What is a podcast? Is it like a radio show that goes to your phone or
Still
something?
hearing that, yeah. Usually from older people. But also, that's when I started editing with 2 VCRs in my room. I'd start listening to the radio. That's how I got into Howard Stern, audiobooks. I just needed something to listen to, and I'd burned out all of my comedy CDs or anything like that. I always need something to be listening to. And the latest incarnation of that was podcasts, because I'm always late to the game, it seems like. I'm a late bloomer. And I'd been hearing about Stone Cold's podcast and things like that, but never really was interested.
You're free to go into your impressions there. You know that, Eric.
There will be plenty of impressions to come, believe me. And as I'm spending all this time trying to clear this room and set up this donation and this dumpster and all this other stuff with the house, I needed something to listen to. So I thought, let me give that a try. And I started. And I know you didn't really care for it, but the Ken Shamrock episode with Steve Austin and the Vader one too, those really made impressions on me. And actually the first one that really did it was Tom Cruise, who's one of my favorite actors, on The Nerdist. Because I just did a Google search. Maybe I'll listen to a lecture on YouTube or something like that. I listen to a lot of YouTube stuff. And I'd never heard an interview, at least from him, like that. And then I go through their cachet and I see they've got all these names like Christopher Lloyd. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Tom Hanks.
Yeah. So I started from there. And now I listen to podcasts all the time. How about you?
Absolutely. I listen to a ton of music, but a great way to break it up and have some company in the car is listening to podcasts. I mean, there's just so many benefits to it. One, for our selfish society, we can choose when we listen to it. We're not married to the time that it's on. There's really, if you can fast forward through the commercials, you can play them faster or slower for a good laugh. Try doing that on your iPhone. It's hysterical.
Lawrence, what you
Well, Rick, I think I like that clip you played before. I listen to a lot of them. There's a ton. I'm obviously WTF with Mark Maron, everybody knows, and The Nerdist, and Kevin Smith's got he's got like a whole podcast empire going with a bunch of different shows. And there's stuff. There's some. I subscribe to these like jazz I'm into jazz, so I listen to these jazz podcasts and
bass playing.
And there's that too.
Yeah.
There's a few of them, yeah, and they're good. You don't even have to be interested in bass and. We'll talk about this when we talk about music, but there are these bass players who have this amazing pedigree of working with other musicians and singers and songwriters and bands, and they have stories about these times that they played with these more famous people and how they operated. And so I must subscribe to like a dozen or two of them, and I mean, you get selective over time. You delete you might see a name you don't know and delete it, which is unfortunate. Sometimes I'll listen to Mark Maron, especially. He'll just because it's him, and I like the way he interviews and what he gets out of people, how honest the conversations are. I might just randomly say, okay, this guy's a guitar player. I like that. I'll listen to it, and maybe I'm not interested after a half an hour or so. But I learn about somebody I didn't know for half an hour. And there've been, off the top of my head, I listened to William Friedkin, right? The guy that did French Connection.
Yes, and The Exorcist.
And The Exorcist,
famously.
and just such a fascinating person.
Right.
You forget the films, just his life story and his take on spirituality.
Yeah, like when he
all these different
went
things.
to see the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, like what? That's where did that come from? And it's shocking just hearing people talk about that they grew up in a town not too far from me or in a similar environment or had parents similar to my parents and experiences that were similar and just hearing how there's no secret to success or fame if you care about that kind of thing. It's just kind of working hard, so to speak, that cliche of working hard and really being passionate about your craft and kind of not taking no for an answer and finding your own path. I mean, that's kind of the thread between all these podcasts is everybody's doing stuff on their own terms to different degrees. Louis C.K., I just listened to him on Maron talk about this Horace and Pete project that he did. And it's just this beautiful story about somebody just having a creative vision that's very clear, and it developed into a very specific idea. And he made this wonderful thing, and it's different and unique from anything he's done and what's out there. But the story of how he arrived at it, and him calling all of these famous actors and actresses and making this piece of art,
The process,
how that is, it's about the journey. You know, to quote Aerosmith, it's life's a journey, not a destination. The idea that working on the thing is actually almost more exciting than the creative process is the strongest process that we've got as people. Once you begin the process, like you're doing right now, Eric, where you choose to get started, you have your vision, you know what you want to do, and you embark on that journey is the cool part. It's not even about the finished product. It's almost like once it's done, who cares? Because it could have come out in a million different ways. As long as it's pretty close to what you wanted, it's cool. And all these podcasts, I mean, Mark Maron, we know, was kind of like struggling comedian or something, and he'd always been almost at the level of some of these other contemporary comedians. And he's like, I'm just going to do this other thing. I'm going to make a podcast because that seems like something people do. And he's doing it in his garage all these years, and he's had the president. And
do you think that validated the podcast format?
In whose mind? In the public's mind? In the mind
yours.
Of the media?
You said something similar along the lines at the time. Like, podcasts have made it.
I think to the listeners, we always knew that it was just as valid, if not more valid and honest than the interviews that we see on television and on the radio and in the newspapers and everything. But the idea that this guy had the president in his garage, and he got an hour with him, and it wasn't just the generic questions about policy and stuff. Doesn't matter which political leaders are. I'm not going to get into that. It's the idea that the president was on a podcast in a dude's garage. At that point, you kind of realize, which is something that I've come to realize the last couple of years of my life, we're all just people. Yes, there are people that are smarter or more they're particularly good at one thing, or maybe they're a genius at math. It doesn't really. We're all just human beings. We're just organisms living on this planet. And when Mark Maron's sitting there cussing the president and they're talking about growing up in California, they're just two people. They have completely different paths, but what happens to them in life is just as interesting. And the process of getting to where they got, to me, is what was fascinating about that interview. Mm-hmm. And they barely talked about politics. I think other media took notice that this is something relevant. When people are doing this, if Tom Cruise goes on a podcast and tells an interesting story that may not have happened on Jimmy Fallon, or wouldn't be able to happen on Jimmy Fallon or Colbert or whomever, that you can't deny it, because it's going to create interest. And here's even more validation. People now, when they do their circuit to promote something, they go on podcasts in a lot of situations. So there you go.
Well, when it comes to audio input, Howard Stern's still number one to me. He'll still take priorities for the few hours a week that he actually does shows.
Is he still on K-Rock? Where can I find him? I'm kidding.
Gets that a lot, but it's a great show on Sirius. But when it comes to podcasts, I have a few.
Like 13 years or something.
Yeah, I have a few that are the ones that I get really excited for when it comes to politics. Ralph Nader Radio Hour from the KPFK studios. It's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I've been
of all the impressions, you do the Ralph Nader impression.
That's not Ralph Nader. That's the guy who does the intro. MMA Insiders, I love. They have great insight. And there's so many that I listen to. The Carson podcast. There's a lot of great informative ones on different areas. But probably my favorite, I always look forward to downloading, is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing, colossal podcast. What you said before really struck a nerve, because it's not just about the dirty jokes and talking about old Hollywood, which I really enjoy, and I don't really hear many other people talking about Lon Chaney as the Wolfman.
Well, it's 2016. It's weird. Like, a lot of those people aren't around anymore. So if those stories aren't preserved on these podcasts, they're kind of gone. And like you said, not to interrupt you, which I do a lot. The way that the internet kind of misconstrues, he's like misconstrues a lot of facts. That he's doing that will preserve those stories in the narrative. So that's a good thing.
And that's what his co-host Frank Santopadre always talks about. We're kind of preserving old Hollywood history in a sense with this. And I just find it very funny and interesting. And hopefully that's what A Few Words with Eric Santamaria will be to everyone else.
I think we're winding down based on the.
Yes, we are. Oh, let me cut you off, Lawrence, just like Chris Jericho does on Talk is Jericho when he starts to read his ads as a transition and he pretends to be talking to the guest who's, I guess, supposed to be sitting there not saying anything through this whole thing. And we're supposed to not be able to tell the difference in audio and it's supposed to be seamless, but it's not. But I actually am a big fan of Talk is Me, Talk is Jericho's podcast. As far as wrestling podcasts go, I think that's probably the best one because it's not just about wrestling. He has on a lot of different kinds of guests, musicians, the host of Sasquatch Chronicles, and that turned me on to that podcast too. And he talks about different things like the supernatural, and I would like to do that too on A Few Words with Eric Santamaria, have some variety. So thank you for listening to the first episode. Hope you enjoyed basically the mission statement and update on what I've been up to the last few years, and let's move forward together. And before we head on out, I have some thank yous to everyone who basically helped me get to this point. First of all, I want to thank everybody who helped me wrap up the estate and get out of my old house. I want to thank Dan, Steph, Justin, and especially Aunt Kathy and the girls, Kara and Jonathan. All of you really stepped up and went above and beyond, and I couldn't have gotten through that terrible situation without all of you. And I wanted to thank my sister and Stacy for everything that you did, and everyone who gave me a place to stay for a little bit until I got back on my feet, and everyone who checked on me. I appreciated that. Also wanted to thank Senpai Figueroa, Joshu Fonda, Sensei Marchand, and everyone I trained with at Tiger Schulman's. I couldn't have gotten better with everyone that I trained with on every skill level, from white belt to black belt, helped me become a better martial artist, athlete, person. I want to thank all the Wrestling Roundtable fans. I can't name all of you, so don't feel left out, but just keep in mind that, or just remember that I know all of you by name, and I appreciate the support over years, especially Stephen Ronald Jackson over in the UK. You've been so supportive and just really nice through the last few years, and I appreciate that you appreciate all the work that I've done in Ring of Honor and the Road Diaries and Respect and Roundtable and other things that start with R. So thanks to all the fans out there. I also wanted to thank everybody who helped get this podcast started. Lawrence, Brian Coppola, Chris Schultz, and especially Peter Melnick of the Audibly Exquisite podcast. All of you were very helpful in figuring out a lot of the technical stuff and things along those lines. So this podcast couldn't have been possible without all of your help. And last but not least, I wanted to thank my beautiful, wonderful girlfriend. You came into my life at just the right time when I needed you the most. I've appreciated all of your support and everyone that I've met through you in your life. I just can't imagine life without you, so thank you so much. Find us on SoundCloud and iTunes. Type in A Few Words with Eric Santamaria. Look us up there. Follow us on Twitter at A Few Words with ES. All those words spelt out. Thank you. Look us up on Facebook. Give us a like. If you want to send us an email, some nice words, hopefully, maybe some feedback and questions, things along those lines, send an email over to afwpod@gmail.com. We will also have a website, hopefully coming soon, so be on the lookout for that. We'll let you know. Next week, I will have a few words with someone you know from the Wrestling Roundtable, one of my longtime friends, right up there with Lawrence, Rodney LeConte. We will be talking about pro wrestling, MMA, neck surgery, editing, and just our adventures in life. So look forward to that next week. Right now, you are listening to a track from Lawrence Haber. It's called Starting Somewhere, and I think that's an appropriate title for what we are doing right now. We are starting somewhere. So look him up on Instagram at Lawrence Haber Music. We will be playing music every week, so hopefully you get turned on to some nice tunes there. I like the Latin flavor in this one, Santamaria. Play us out, Lawrence. Well, what does that mean, to play us out? We'll do it live! Bye for now.